Did the biggest stage in the world just pull off the quietest robbery in music history? Because while millions of people were watching the Super Bowl halftime show, cheering, arguing, celebrating, and fighting online about Bad Bunny's performance, another conversation was happening behind the scenes. A much quieter conversation. One that people inside the music industry are still whispering about today. And once you hear the full story, you might start wondering if the halftime show we saw was never the show that was originally supposed to happen. Because according to insiders, leaked conversations, and a growing wave of fans who have been piecing together clues for months, the artists who dominated the biggest cultural moment of 2025 were nowhere to be found on the biggest stage of 2026. And that absence? It wasn't an accident. The truth is, the world was already in the middle of a phenomenon that nobody saw coming. A Netflix animated film dropped almost quietly, and then exploded into something so massive it completely rewired the global music conversation. Within weeks, it wasn't just a movie anymore. It was a movement. The soundtrack was everywhere. The dances were everywhere. The songs were everywhere. Athletes were doing the choreography. Celebrities were quoting the lyrics. Even people who had never listened to K-pop in their lives suddenly found themselves humming the same song over and over again. That song was Golden, and the voices behind it were three women who went from being respected in industry circles to becoming the center of a worldwide cultural storm almost overnight. EJAE, Audrey Nuna, and Ray Amy, the trio known as Huntr/X. What happened next shocked the entire industry. Because when the biggest cultural moment of the year arrived, the Super Bowl halftime show, fans expected one thing. The music industry expected one thing. Even insiders say early discussions hinted at one thing. But the stage lights came on, and those three women weren't there. Instead, the show belonged to someone else. Now let's be clear before people start twisting this story. Bad Bunny is a global superstar. Nobody questions his talent. Nobody questions his influence. His performance was historic, emotional, and deeply meaningful for millions of fans around the world. But that's not the question people are asking. The question people are asking is this: if Huntr/X created the biggest song and biggest cultural moment of that entire year, why weren't they standing on the biggest stage in the world? Because the deeper you look into what happened behind the scenes, the stranger the story becomes. Interviews started getting careful. Industry insiders started speaking in half sentences. And the members of Huntr/X themselves? They never directly accused anyone of anything, but they didn't deny the rumors either. In fact, during multiple interviews, EJA kept dropping tiny hints that fans immediately picked up on. Small comments, long pauses, a few words that seemed harmless on the surface but sent the internet into detective mode overnight. And suddenly, a theory started spreading everywhere. A theory that suggested something huge had changed at the last minute. A theory that suggested the halftime show the world saw might not have been the one originally planned. And if that theory is even partially true, then what happened behind the scenes might explain why the entire music industry has been acting strangely ever since. Because the story doesn't start at the Super Bowl. It starts months earlier, with a movie nobody expected, a song nobody could escape, and three women who accidentally created the biggest cultural phenomenon of the decade. And once you see how fast Huntr/X took over the world, you might start wondering the same thing fans are asking everywhere right now. Were they actually robbed of the biggest stage in music? Or did something happen behind closed doors that the public was never supposed to notice? Because when we go back to the beginning of the K-pop Demon Hunters explosion, the timeline starts getting very suspicious. And trust me, this is where the story gets even crazier. The truth is, none of this controversy makes sense unless you understand just how massive the K-pop Demon Hunters phenomenon actually became. Because the explosion that followed wasn't just a viral moment. It wasn't just another streaming hit. What happened in 2025 was something the entertainment industry rarely sees. A cultural wave so powerful that it crossed language barriers, music genres, and even generations. When the animated film K-pop Demon Hunters quietly dropped on Netflix on June 20th, 2025, almost nobody expected it to change the entire music landscape. Studios assumed it would perform well with younger audiences. Streaming executives thought it might trend for a few weeks, but what actually happened shocked everyone. Within days, clips from the movie started circulating everywhere. TikTok dances, Instagram edits, reaction videos. People were suddenly obsessed with the characters, the visuals, and especially the soundtrack. And once that soundtrack hit streaming platforms, the numbers began climbing at a speed that made even veteran music executives nervous. Within the first month alone, the film smashed every internal projection Netflix had. By the end of the summer, it had crossed 314 million views, becoming the most watched animated movie in the platform's history. But the movie wasn't even the real story. The music was. Every single original track from the soundtrack began charting globally. Billboard analysts started noticing something strange. Noise 6 songs from the same animated film were climbing the Hot 100 at the exact same time. That almost never happens. But then something even bigger happened. One song began separating itself from the rest. That song was Golden. And when Golden hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, history quietly changed. Because for the first time ever, a female-led K-pop group had reached the top of that chart with an original soundtrack record. Suddenly, the entire music industry started paying attention. Radio stations that had never played K-pop began adding Golden to their rotation. Sports arenas started blasting it during games. Celebrity athletes were posting themselves doing the choreography online. There was even a moment that perfectly captured how surreal the situation had become. When tennis legend Novak Djokovic celebrated a major victory and jokingly recreated the Huntr X dance moves during a post-match interview. That was the moment people realized this wasn't just a fandom trend anymore. This was global culture. And right in the center of that storm stood a woman who had already spent years shaping the K-pop industry from behind the scenes. EJA. Inside the industry, EJA had been respected for a long time. She had written and produced for major groups like aespa, Les Seraphim, Twice, and NMIXX. Producers talked about her like she was one of the quiet architects of modern K-pop, but the public barely knew her name. Until Demon Hunters. Because EJA didn't just contribute a song to the project. She helped build the entire musical identity of the film from the ground up. She had joined the project almost 5 years before it was released, working closely with the directors and composers to experiment with dozens of versions of each track. Some scenes reportedly went through nearly 60 different musical drafts before they finally landed on the final sound. That level of perfectionism is rare even in the music industry. But when the movie finally arrived, all that work paid off. Golden didn't just feel like another pop song. It felt cinematic, emotional, powerful. Fans described it as the kind of song that made them want to stand up and move even when they didn't know the choreography yet. And when EJA teamed up with Audrey Nuna and Ray Amy, something special happened. Their voices blended together in a way that made the trio feel larger than life. Fans began calling them Huntr X, the real-world musical trio behind the fictional universe of the film. And suddenly, these 3 women were everywhere. Music videos were exploding with views. Interviews were piling up. Fashion brands were calling. Late-night shows wanted performances. Even people who had never watched the movie were singing the lyrics. It reached a point where dads who had never listened to K-pop before were humming the song in grocery stores. That's when the industry realized something important. Huntr X wasn't just riding a trend. They had created the defining soundtrack of the year. And this is where the timeline begins to get very interesting. Because while all of this was happening, while Golden dominated charts, while the movie shattered streaming records, while fans across the world were becoming obsessed, another massive announcement hit the headlines. The Super Bowl halftime performer for 2026 had been chosen. The NFL revealed that the headline act for Super Bowl 60 would be global reggaeton superstar Bad Bunny. The reaction was immediate. Supporters celebrated the historic moment. Bad Bunny would become the first predominantly Spanish-language artist to headline the biggest stage in American sports. His fans called it overdue recognition for Latin music's global dominance. But the backlash was just as loud. Certain political commentators exploded online. Conservative media personalities called the decision controversial. Petitions circulated demanding a different performer. Some public figures even suggested country artists should replace him. The debate became so intense that the halftime show was trending for weeks before a single rehearsal had even started. But while the internet argued about Bad Bunny, something else quietly happened behind the scenes. Something that would later become one of the most talked about clues in this entire mystery. Because one night, during the premiere episode of Saturday Night Live's 51st season, Bad Bunny appeared as the host. And during that episode, something very unusual happened. Instead of focusing on his own music, the show suddenly built an entire sketch around K-pop demon hunters. Not a quick joke, not a small reference, a full comedic skit dedicated to the movie. In the sketch, Bad Bunny played a man obsessed with the animated film. Now, his friends tried to talk about serious movies, but he couldn't stop talking about Huntr X and their music-fighting demons. The audience laughed. But then the sketch took an unexpected turn. A thought bubble appeared above Bad Bunny's head. And inside that bubble were EJA, Audrey Nuna, and Ray Amy, and they began performing Golden. The crowd inside the studio immediately lost their minds. People screamed. People stood up. Social media exploded with clips within minutes. And then something even more surprising happened. The sketch ended with the three women walking onto the stage in real life and performing Golden live for the first time ever. That moment became one of the most viral SNL clips of the entire year. But what many fans didn't realize at the time was that this appearance may have been hinting at something much bigger. Because as the months went on, the members of Huntr X started speaking very carefully in interviews, not accusing anyone, not complaining, just hinting. Hinting that things behind the scenes didn't go exactly the way people think they did. And once fans started putting those hints together with the timing of the Super Bowl announcement, a theory began forming. A theory that suggested Huntr X might have originally been connected to the halftime show conversation in a much bigger way than anyone realized. And if that theory is true, then what happened next might explain why the music industry still refuses to talk openly about the Super Bowl decision. Because when we finally arrive at February 8th, 2026, the story takes a turn that nobody expected. And that's when the halftime show controversy truly explodes. And trust me, the twist that comes next is the part that made fans start saying Huntr/X was robbed. By the time February 8th, 2026 finally arrived, the entire country was already in a state of anticipation. The Super Bowl had returned. The stadium lights were blazing over Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara, and millions of viewers around the world were tuning in not just for the game, but for the halftime spectacle everyone had been arguing about for months. The New England Patriots and the Seattle Seahawks were battling it out on the field, but let's be honest. Everyone knew the real cultural event of the night was coming at halftime. Bad Bunny had been preparing for weeks. Rumors about his performance were swirling across the industry. Insiders claimed the show would be emotional, political, and visually massive. There were whispers about surprise guests, stage transformations, and even a real wedding ceremony happening during the performance. And when halftime finally arrived, the stage exploded to life. The lights cut out. A massive Puerto Rican flag illuminated the stadium floor. And then Bad Bunny stepped out. For 13 minutes, the performance was pure spectacle. The choreography was explosive. The visuals were cinematic. Dancers flooded the stage while fireworks blasted above the stadium roof. Fans watching around the world flooded social media with clips, praising the performance as a powerful celebration of Latino identity and culture. At one point, he even handed his Grammy Award to a young boy in the crowd, a symbolic gesture that instantly went viral. Then came the surprise appearances. Ricky Martin walked out for an emotional acoustic moment about protecting Puerto Rican culture. Then, shockingly, Lady Gaga appeared briefly during one of the performance transitions. The internet exploded. But here's where the night took a strange turn. Because the moment the performance ended, the world split into two completely different conversations. One side called it historic. Fans celebrated the show as one of the most culturally important halftime performances in years. Latino communities praised the representation. Music critics applauded the emotional storytelling and bold political messaging. But the other side, they were furious. Certain political figures immediately began attacking the performance. Conservative commentators called it inappropriate. Some lawmakers even wrote letters to the FCC demanding investigations into the broadcast. Within hours, the halftime show had become a political battlefield. But while the media was busy arguing about language, culture, and politics, a different conversation started quietly spreading across social media. It began with fans. Then music journalists picked it up. Then insiders started whispering about it. The question was simple. Where was Huntr/X? Because if you looked at the cultural landscape of 2025 leading into 2026, something didn't add up. Golden had been everywhere. The song dominated charts across multiple countries. TikTok was flooded with dance videos. Celebrities were referencing the movie. Even athletes were recreating the choreography during championship celebrations. For months, Ash the Demon Hunter soundtrack had been the biggest music moment in the world. Yet when the halftime stage opened, not a single member of Huntr/X appeared. Not even for a cameo. And that's when fans started noticing something even stranger. Because only a few months earlier, the trio had appeared alongside Bad Bunny on Saturday Night Live. Not only that, they had performed Golden together in the same broadcast. So if the artists were already collaborating publicly, why were they suddenly absent from the biggest performance of the year? At first, people assumed it was simply scheduling. Maybe they were busy. Maybe negotiations didn't work out. Maybe the NFL wanted a different creative direction. But then a few interviews started circulating. And that's when the internet detectives went into overdrive. During one interview, EJAA was asked directly about the Super Bowl. Her response seemed polite, but something about it felt loaded. She smiled and said something along the lines of, "The moment will come when it's supposed to." At first, nobody thought much about it. But then Audrey Nuna gave another interview days later where she made a comment that caught fans off guard. She said, "We're grateful people even thought about us being there." That sentence triggered thousands of posts online. Because suddenly fans started asking, wait, why would people be thinking about them performing at the Super Bowl unless that possibility existed in the first place? And that's when the rumors began. According to several music insiders, early discussions around the halftime show reportedly included multiple concepts before the final version was chosen. Yeah, one of those rumored concepts? A performance celebrating the biggest global music moments of the year. And if that concept had moved forward, there was one song that almost certainly would have been included. Golden. Think about the timing. The song was dominating streaming platforms. It was nominated for major awards. It was trending across social media platforms every single week. And the trio behind it had just delivered one of the most viral live performances of the year on SNL. Everything seemed to be aligning perfectly. Until suddenly, it wasn't. According to insiders who later spoke anonymously to entertainment reporters, the halftime show concept reportedly changed direction late in the planning process. The performance shifted toward a more focused celebration of Bad Bunny's personal artistic journey, somehow which meant fewer guest artists, fewer outside musical moments. And suddenly the idea of bringing in Huntr/X disappeared from the conversation. Officially, nobody confirmed this. But unofficially, industry insiders began saying the same thing in private conversations. The moment slipped away. And if that's true, it means something massive almost happened on that stage. Because imagine the scene. The stadium lights dim. Bad Bunny performs his opening sequence. And then suddenly the stage transforms into the Demon Hunters universe. Golden begins. EJA, Audrey Nuna, and Ray Amy appear in front of 100 million viewers. That moment alone would have broken the internet. But it never happened. And that's when fans started using a word that spread across social media like wildfire. Robbed. Not because Bad Bunny didn't deserve the stage, but because people began wondering if the biggest song of the year had quietly been left out of the biggest performance of the year. And just when the conversation started dying down, something unexpected happened. Because a few weeks later, the Grammy Awards arrived, and Golden's nomination placed Huntr/X directly in the same room as the biggest artists in the world. Which meant one thing: the story wasn't over yet. In fact, what happened backstage at the Grammys would spark an entirely new wave of speculation. And this next twist? It made the Super Bowl controversy even bigger. Just when the Super Bowl conversation was starting to cool down, something unexpected reignited the entire debate. And this time, it happened on one of the biggest nights in music: the Grammy Awards. Because while the Super Bowl halftime show had divided audiences for days, the music industry still had one more stage where the biggest songs of the year would stand side by side. And right there, among some of the most powerful names in music, sat a title that many people in the room had been quietly talking about for months: Golden, by Huntr/X. That nomination alone was historic. The category was stacked with heavyweights. Artists like Lady Gaga, Kendrick Lamar, Billie Eilish, Bruno Mars, Sabrina Carpenter, and Bad Bunny himself were all competing in the same space. These were artists who had spent years dominating charts and global tours. But the fact that Golden had entered that room at all sent a clear message. The trio behind the Demon Hunters soundtrack were no longer just a viral phenomenon. They were now part of the highest level of the music industry. And that's when something very interesting started happening backstage. Journalists covering the Grammys began noticing something unusual. Every time Huntr/X appeared on the red carpet, reporters kept asking the same question. Not about the movie, not about the soundtrack, not even about the Grammy nomination itself. They kept asking about the Super Bowl. At first, EJA handled it with her usual calm composure. She smiled, thanked fans for their support, and gave diplomatic answers that avoided any kind of controversy. But fans watching closely noticed something subtle. She never denied the rumors, not once. In fact, in one interview that quickly started circulating online, a reporter casually asked her whether she had watched the halftime show. EJ paused. It wasn't a long pause, maybe just 2 seconds. But in media interviews, even a moment like that can say a lot. Then she answered with a line that instantly spread across social media. She said, quietly, "It was a beautiful show, but every year has its moment." That single sentence sparked an explosion of speculation. Fans started dissecting the comment like detectives analyzing evidence. What did she mean by "every year has its moment"? Was she hinting that Huntr/X might have their own halftime moment someday? Or was she subtly acknowledging that the moment everyone thought belonged to them had already passed? The internet immediately split into two camps. Some fans insisted there was no drama at all. They argued that people were reading too much into normal interview answers. After all, artists say diplomatic things all the time. But others weren't convinced. Because that wasn't the only thing that happened at the Grammys that night. Several music industry insiders later revealed that multiple executives had privately congratulated the trio on the success of Golden while also making comments that sounded strangely sympathetic. One producer reportedly told a journalist, "Those girls changed the whole year. Everyone knows it." Another insider allegedly said something even more interesting. "Timing in this business is everything. Sometimes culture moves faster than the machine." That sentence alone started trending across fan forums because it seemed to perfectly describe the situation people believed had happened. Culture had moved, but the Super Bowl decision-making machine had moved slower. And by the time everything aligned, the moment had already shifted. But the real explosion happened a few days later. That's when fans discovered a clip from a private industry panel that EJA had participated in shortly after the Grammys. The panel itself wasn't controversial. It was about songwriting and music production. But during the discussion, one of the moderators asked EJ a question that no one expected. He asked her what it felt like to watch Golden become a global anthem. Her answer was honest. She talked about the 5 years of work that went into the project, the dozens of demo versions, the creative battles, the uncertainty about whether audiences would even understand what they were trying to build. And then she said something that immediately went viral. She said, "When you build something for that long, you always imagine the moment it will reach the world." Then she paused again and finished the thought. Sometimes that moment arrives exactly the way you imagined. Sometimes it arrives differently. The clip spread everywhere. Within hours, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube were flooded with commentary videos analyzing the statement. Fans began connecting it to the Super Bowl conversation again, and suddenly the narrative grew even bigger. Now people weren't just asking if Huntr/X had missed the halftime show. They were asking if the trio had been one decision away from standing on the biggest stage in the world. And that's when a final twist started surfacing in music industry circles. According to several insiders, the NFL and its entertainment partners had been navigating an extremely complicated cultural environment when planning the halftime show. Political tension in the United States was already high. Immigration debates were dominating headlines. The idea of a Spanish-language headliner performing at the Super Bowl had already triggered massive controversy. Some insiders claimed the league may have felt adding another international cultural moment, 3 women of Korean and Asian descent performing a K-pop anthem, might have created an even bigger political storm. None of this was ever confirmed publicly. But the theory spread quickly, and suddenly the conversation changed again. Because if that theory had any truth to it, then Huntr/X hadn't simply been overlooked. They had been caught in the middle of a cultural calculation, a decision where the NFL chose the safest version of a groundbreaking moment instead of the most explosive one. And once that possibility entered the conversation, fans began asking a question that nobody in the music industry seemed comfortable answering. Was the halftime show really about music? Or was it about managing the politics surrounding it? Because if the cultural moment of the year truly belonged to Golden, then the biggest stage in America might have just missed the most powerful performance it could have had. And the wildest part? The story still isn't finished. Because what happened next on social media turned this entire debate into one of the most heated fan discussions the music industry has seen in years. And once the internet got involved, the controversy exploded. Once the internet got involved, the situation exploded into something far bigger than anyone in the music industry expected. What started as a quiet discussion among fans suddenly turned into one of the most heated online debates of the entire year. Within hours of those Grammy interview clips circulating, social media timelines were flooded with posts asking the same question. Did the Super Bowl miss the real cultural moment of the year? At first, the conversation lived mostly inside K-pop communities. Fans who had followed the Demon Hunters phenomenon from the beginning began posting clips comparing the massive success of Golden to the halftime show lineup. They pointed out the numbers, the streams, the viral dance challenges, the global reach of the song. One tweet that quickly went viral simply said, "Golden dominated 2025. The Super Bowl dominated 2026. But somehow, those two moments never met." Within hours, that tweet had millions of views. But then something unexpected happened. The debate left the K-pop fandom bubble and entered the mainstream music conversation. Pop fans, hip-hop fans, and even sports audiences began weighing in. Suddenly, the question wasn't just about Huntr/X anymore. It became about how the music industry decides who represents the biggest moment in culture. Some fans were extremely supportive of Bad Bunny. They argued that his performance represented a historic breakthrough for Latin music on the Super Bowl stage, and that the show was designed around his personal artistic vision. According to them, the halftime show wasn't supposed to be a playlist of the year's biggest songs. It was meant to highlight one artist's creative journey. But another group of fans pushed back hard. They weren't attacking Bad Bunny at all. Instead, They were asking whether the Super Bowl had missed an opportunity to showcase something that felt truly global. To them, Golden represented a moment where music crossed language barriers in a way very few songs ever manage. People from completely different cultures were singing the same lyrics. Teenagers were doing the dance. Parents were learning the choreography. Even professional athletes were posting videos performing the moves. To those fans, the Demon Huntr soundtrack wasn't just popular. It felt like a cultural wave. And waves like that don't come along often. As the debate intensified, entertainment reporters began noticing the online discussion and started covering it themselves. Headlines began appearing across entertainment blogs and music commentary channels, asking whether the biggest hit of the year had been absent from the biggest performance of the year. Soon, celebrities started chiming in too. One well-known pop producer posted a cryptic message on social media that instantly caught attention. It simply read, "The culture moves first, the industry catches up later." Fans immediately connected that comment to the ongoing debate about Huntr X. Another artist tweeted, "Golden was everywhere last year. That kind of energy doesn't happen often." None of these statements directly criticized the halftime show, but the timing of the comments added fuel to the fire. And then came the fan edits. Yet thousands of creators on TikTok and YouTube began imagining what the halftime show could have looked like if Huntr X had appeared. Some edits recreated the Super Bowl stage and inserted the opening notes of Golden into the performance. Others imagined dramatic transitions where Bad Bunny would finish a segment and the Demon Hunters trio would suddenly appear as surprise guests. One video titled, "The Halftime Moment That Never Happened," gained millions of views in less than 24 hours. And that's when the phrase started trending. Huntr/X was robbed. It wasn't an official accusation. It wasn't backed by any confirmed reports. But the phrase spread like wildfire across fan communities. Meanwhile, the members of Huntr X themselves stayed almost completely silent. No angry posts, no dramatic interviews, no public complaints. In fact, NEJA continued speaking about the success of Demon Hunters with gratitude and excitement. Audrey Nuna and Ray Amy focused on upcoming projects and performances, but their silence only made the internet speculate even more. Because sometimes silence in the entertainment industry says more than any statement ever could. And the longer the trio avoided addressing the Super Bowl conversation directly, the louder the online debate became. Some fans began predicting that the next Super Bowl halftime show would finally feature Huntr X. Others believed the controversy might push the NFL to consider more global collaborations in future performances. But one thing became very clear. The conversation had permanently changed how people looked at that halftime show. What was originally meant to be a celebration of music had turned into a cultural what-if moment, one that fans would continue discussing for years. And yet, the most surprising part of this entire story was still ahead. Because while the internet argued and speculated about what might have happened behind the scenes, the members of Huntr X were quietly preparing for the next chapter of their careers. And according to several insiders in the music industry, that next chapter might be even bigger than the moment everyone thinks they lost. In fact, some executives are already saying the same thing privately. The Super Bowl conversation didn't end their rise. It might have actually supercharged it. And if that prediction turns out to be true, then the real story of Huntr X is only just beginning. And because the next twist in this saga could place them back in the exact spotlight people think they missed. Only this time, the entire world will be watching. Just when people thought the debate was finally calming down, the story took one last twist that nobody saw coming. Because while fans were still arguing online about whether Huntr/X had been robbed of the Super Bowl moment, something started happening quietly inside the music industry. Major labels started moving. Fast. According to several insiders who spoke anonymously to entertainment reporters, the Demon Hunters' success had triggered a massive shift in how record executives were thinking about global pop music. The numbers behind Golden had shocked everyone. The song wasn't just big in one region. It was dominating playlists across North America, Europe, Asia, and Latin America simultaneously. That kind of global reach is extremely rare. But the biggest surprise wasn't the streams. It was the audience. Industry analysts began studying the data and realized something unusual. The people listening to Golden weren't only K-pop fans. The audience included pop listeners, gamers, movie fans, sports fans, and even people who had never followed Korean music before. In other words, the song had broken out of its genre completely. That discovery made executives realize something powerful. Huntr/X wasn't just a soundtrack act. They were potentially the next global pop phenomenon. And that's when rumors began circulating about what might happen next. Several music insiders claimed that major promoters were already discussing the possibility of launching the trio into something much bigger than a movie soundtrack. Talks reportedly included world tours, brand partnerships, and even a large-scale live-stage production inspired by the Demon Hunters universe. But one rumor in particular caught everyone's attention, because according to people close to the industry, there were early discussions about something that sounded almost unbelievable. A future Super Bowl halftime appearance. Not as guests, not as background performers, but as headliners. Now, to be clear, nothing official has been announced. The NFL never comments on future halftime performers this early. But the mere idea that the conversation might be happening was enough to send fans into another frenzy online. Because suddenly the narrative flipped. Instead of saying Huntr/X had missed their moment, fans started wondering if the moment had simply been delayed. And that's when EJA made one final comment that sent chills through the fandom. During a small music industry interview a few weeks later, she was asked about everything that had happened over the past year. The Demon Hunters explosion, the Grammy nomination, the endless debate about the Super Bowl. Her answer was calm, but incredibly confident. She smiled and said something that fans immediately began sharing everywhere. The story we started is still being written. That was it. No explanation, no drama, just that one sentence. But for the millions of people who had followed the journey of Golden, that line felt like a promise. Because sometimes in the music industry, the biggest moments don't happen the first time the spotlight appears. Sometimes the spotlight comes back around, bigger, louder, and impossible to ignore. And if the rise of Huntr/X over the past year has proven anything, it's this. They didn't become a global phenomenon overnight. They built it slowly, carefully, song by song, moment by moment. Which means the question everyone has been asking since the Super Bowl might not be the right question after all. Maybe the real question is this: was the halftime show the opportunity they lost? Or was it simply the preview of something even bigger that hasn't happened yet? Because if the momentum behind Golden continues to grow the way insiders believe it will, then the next time the world gathers around the biggest stage in music, there's a very real chance that the conversation won't be about who should have been there. It will be about how Huntr/X finally took the stage. And when that day comes, the entire debate about whether they were robbed will suddenly feel very different. Because history has a funny way of circling back to the artists who started the cultural wave in the first place. And if the music industry has learned anything from the Demon Hunters explosion, it's that waves like that are impossible to stop. They only get bigger. And the next one might be even louder. But now the real question goes to you. Do you think Huntr/X truly deserved the Super Bowl halftime spotlight? Or do you believe the NFL made the right decision by focusing the entire show on Bad Bunny's historic performance? Because the debate clearly isn't over. In fact, it may only be getting started. If you enjoyed breaking down this story with us, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next deep dive into the biggest entertainment stories happening behind the headlines. And trust me, if new developments around Huntr/X, the Super Bowl, or the Demon Hunters universe appear, you'll hear about them here first. Until then, drop your thoughts in the comments, because the internet is still trying to answer one question. Was this the Super Bowl performance of the year, or the biggest missed opportunity in music history?